Thalita Lyra grew up in Rio de Janeiro, surrounded by people who knew how to bring others together. Her father worked with musicians, signing bands and helping them fill clubs, while her mother worked as a tour guide, introducing people from around the world to places like Botafogo, La Paz, and Ipanema. Thalita grew up watching both of them turn their work into something social. Her father could fill a room with people brought together by music, while her mother could take a group of strangers and give them an experience they would share long after they went home. Thalita loved that. Even as a child, she seemed to understand that the best experiences weren't necessarily the ones that you had alone. Some of her earliest experiences with that kind of community came through her uncle Inacio and kite fighting. When Thalita was young, she watched Inacio compete in a tournament that came down to him and a teenager from Botafogo. Inacio won, and while everyone around them celebrated, Thalita watched her uncle approach the boy he had just defeated and shake his hand. The teenager had smiled. He had lost, but it didn't seem to matter nearly as much as Thalita might have expected. He was still surrounded by friends and people who shared his passion, enjoying a beautiful day with the community he belonged to. Thalita watched his kite slowly fall back to earth, and the moment stayed with her. As she got older, kite fighting became part of her own life. Inacio owned a beachfront kite shop, and when Thalita and her younger brother Renato started getting into the kind of petty arguments siblings usually have, their uncle taught them to settle those disagreements with kites. They learned how to make them, fly them, and fight them until one sibling managed to cut the other's string. What started as a way to keep the two of them from arguing eventually became something they both loved. They spent their summers at Inacio's shop, working during the mornings and kite fighting during the afternoons. Their matches attracted people from around the beach, and it wasn't long before Thalita began teaching other people how to do it themselves. She was good at that part. Thalita could stand in front of a group of kids and explain how to design a kite, and they actually paid attention. People listened to her, laughed at her jokes, talked to her, and wanted to be around her. Even Renato noticed how naturally it seemed to happen for his sister. Thalita wasn't simply making more people interested in kite fighting, though. She was building friendships around it. When Thalita was 10, she was spending part of the day with her father at a club when they discovered a young man spray painting the building outside. Her father confronted him and brought him inside to meet the club's owner, Angelo. Thalita had been told to stay out of the situation, but curiosity had gotten the better of her, and she slowly moved closer until she could see what was happening. Her father showed Angelo a photograph of the graffiti, and instead of becoming angry, Angelo smiled. Before long, the adults were laughing together, and the young man who had been caught spray painting the building was taken toward Angelo's office. By the time it was over, Thalita understood that her father had apparently helped the young artist get a job. She grew up watching the adults around her connect with people in unexpected places, and as Thalita moved into her teenage years, her own social circle continued growing around Inacio's shop. Many of her friends were people she met through kite fighting. Some had been coming to the beach before she started working there, while others had learned the sport from Thalita herself. After closing the shop, Thalita sometimes spent her nights with those friends around a bonfire on the beach, passing drinks around, laughing, and singing together after a long day. She enjoyed competing, but the people she met through kite fighting had become just as important as the sport itself. Thalita paid attention to them, too. The longer she knew someone, the more she began recognizing pieces of their personality in the way they competed. Some people were gracious when they won, others weren't. She could lose and immediately enjoy the rest of the night with everyone else, while others had a much harder time letting defeat go. And for Thalita, knowing the people she competed against made her better at the sport, but it also made the sport more fun. Eventually, she decided to start filming their kite fights and posting them online. Thalita originally saw the videos as free publicity for Inacio's shop. If people watched them and became interested in kite fighting, maybe they would come down to the beach and try it themselves. But the videos started getting attention for another reason. People liked Thalita. The videos featuring her commentary received more views, and people began commenting on her insight into kite fighting as well as her personality and charm. Eventually, the videos caught the attention of a modeling agent. And for Thalita, this was an exciting opportunity. She had grown up watching telenovelas, and modeling offered a possible path towards something she had dreamed about for years. Acting. Thalita began booking photo shoots for print advertisements and appearing in commercials. She enjoyed the work and started imagining how far it might take her. If she could transition from modeling into acting, she could become genuinely famous, perhaps throughout Brazil and even beyond it. The idea appealed to her for more than the glamour. Thalita had always wanted to reach people. Now she had the chance to reach more of them than ever before, so she committed herself to it. At first, that meant giving up kite fighting. The small cuts and nicks the sport left on her hands needed time to heal for modeling work. Then it meant spending less time at Inacio's shop, and more of her days were consumed by photo shoots, networking, maintaining professional relationships, and trying to secure the next job before the current one had even finished. By the time Thalita graduated from high school, her agent wanted to find her even more work. That meant even less time at the shop, but Thalita believed it was part of the sacrifice required to get where she wanted to go, so she kept working. Years passed, and eventually the life Thalita had imagined as a teenager stopped feeling glamorous. She was exhausted. The attention she had once wanted began to make her uncomfortable. Strangers stared at her, sometimes for longer than she wanted them to, and being recognizable no longer felt anything like the connection she had imagined fame would bring her. That was the problem. People knew what Thalita looked like. They didn't know Thalita. She had spent so much of her time chasing a larger audience that she had gradually separated herself from the community where she had once felt most comfortable. Late nights talking with Renato helped her finally understand what she was missing. It wasn't fame. It was genuine connection with people who cared about the same things she did. It was exactly what she had grown up watching her parents create, and it was exactly what she had once found at Inacio's kite shop. So, Thalita quit modeling. Within a few months, she took the money she had earned, and with Inacio's blessing, opened her own kite shop called Fun Kites Rio. Renato joined her as her business partner, and Thalita's years in modeling ended up helping the new business. People recognized her, and that attention brought more customers into the shop and introduced more people to kite fighting. This time, however, Thalita wasn't using kite fighting to reach fame. She was using the fame she already had to bring people to kite fighting. And Fun Kites Rio became a success. Outside of the business, Thalita was still very much the same person who had grown up on the beach. During a night out with friends, she walked into a nightclub bathroom and discovered two women fighting on the floor. One of them was on top of the other and continuing to attack her while the woman underneath tried to get her to stop. Thalita didn't stand back and watch. Her mother had taught her jujitsu, and Thalita used it to pull the attacker away and restrain her on the floor. She didn't start throwing punches or try to hurt her. She simply positioned herself so the woman couldn't continue the attack and held her there while someone went to find a bouncer. Thalita could handle herself when she needed to, but hurting someone wasn't the point. Stopping the fight was. That same balance between competition and connection had always been part of her relationship with kite fighting. Thalita loved to compete, especially with Renato, and eventually the two found themselves facing each other at the end of another tournament. This time, Renato managed to beat her, cutting her line and sending her kite down. But there wasn't any resentment when it was over. Renato gave his sister a hug. And for all the ways the siblings could irritate and challenge one another, Thalita had spent years pushing Renato to become better, and the competition between them had never changed the fact that they were on the same side. Because for Thalita, that was what kite fighting had always been. You could compete with someone without needing it to tear them down. And as Fun Kites Rio grew, Thalita decided to take the community surrounding it even further. She organized the shop's first tournament. Hundreds of people came to the outskirts of Rio, filling the field with competitors, spectators, friends, and families, while dozens of kites moved through the sky above them. Thalita spent the day everywhere at once, socializing, helping with the event, and occasionally competing herself. And at some point, she managed to get away from everyone for a few minutes. And she cried. She was happy. This was exactly what she had wanted. Thalita had once imagined becoming famous enough that her community could stretch across Brazil and even farther. But standing there at the tournament, she finally had the version of that dream that actually meant something to her. These people weren't staring at her because they recognized her from an advertisement. They were people sharing something together because she had helped create a place for them to do it. Thalita had built her own community. Unfortunately, that same night would be the last she ever spent in it. When the tournament ended and everyone began leaving, the field was covered in litter. Thalita and Renato stayed behind to clean it up, and by the time they were finishing, the full moon was already high in the sky. That was when Renato noticed a strange drone hovering above the field. The sight brought out the mischievous side of Thalita that had never really disappeared. Soon, the siblings were using their kites to see who could bring it down first. Thalita won. Her kite became tangled in the drone's rotors, sending the damaged machine sputtering into the nearby forest with smoke trailing behind it. Thalita was happy to leave both the drone and her kite exactly where they had fallen. Renato decided to go looking for it. Thalita didn't want to follow him into the woods, but she also wasn't comfortable letting her brother wander into a dark forest alone. So, she followed. And then deep among the trees, Thalita heard a scream. A man, covered in blood, suddenly emerged from the darkness and grabbed Renato, desperate for help. Before either of them could do anything, the man was killed in front of them. His body was split apart, revealing a woman dressed in advanced hunting equipment behind him. Adriana Imai, the skull merchant. The drone Thalita had knocked out of the sky belonged to her, and now the siblings had stumbled directly into her hunting ground. Thalita realized that Renato's arm had been badly cut and that he was in shock. She didn't know exactly when he had been injured, but there wasn't time to figure it out. So she grabbed her brother and ran. Through the forest, Thalita spotted an old factory, a rotting brick building that looked as though it were slowly collapsing under its own age. It wasn't much, but it gave them somewhere to hide. She led Renato inside and found a dark alcove, then dragged wooden beams across the entrance while the skull merchant followed them into the building. Thalita knew they couldn't stay there. Even if Adriana didn't find them herself, one of her drones eventually would. Then Thalita looked out from their hiding place and saw something impossible. The old factory was changing. Its dark, decaying walls were disappearing, replaced by bright sunlight and a beach. Thalita had no idea what was happening, but Renato was wounded and they were being hunted. Whatever was in front of them looked like a way out. She pulled Renato to his feet and put his arm around herself. He seemed to be trying to stop her, but Thalita kept going, and together they ran onto the beach. The skull merchant disappeared behind them as Thalita helped her injured brother across the warm sand, and she kept running. Even when that sand began disappearing beneath a sea of swirling black fog, Thalita never stopped. The beach vanished, the forest was gone, and Thalita Lyra disappeared into the fog. You know, there's actually something very different about Thalita's story compared with many of the people who eventually find themselves inside the entity's realm. When the fog found her, her life wasn't falling apart. Thalita had already gone through the period where she didn't know what she wanted. She had chased fame because she genuinely believed it would make her happy. More importantly, she thought becoming famous would allow her to do on a massive scale what she had always done naturally: reach people. And for a while, it probably looked like she was right. Her face was appearing in advertisements and commercials. People recognized her. She was moving closer to the acting career she had imagined while watching telenovelas as a girl. Then, when she got there, she discovered that being seen by people wasn't the same thing as connecting with them. That's what I think I really like about Thalita's story. She actually realized she was wrong, and then she changed her life. She didn't continue modeling because she had already invested years into it. She didn't convince herself that becoming even more famous would eventually fix the problem. She figured out what she was missing and went back to something that genuinely made her happy. But she didn't really go backward either. Thalita had taken the money she earned from modeling, the recognition she gained from it, and everything she learned along the way, and used it to build something completely new. Fun Kites Rio wasn't Inacio's shop, it was hers. And when hundreds of people eventually showed up for that first tournament, Thalita finally had the thing she had been trying to create for most of her life. It wasn't an audience, it was a community. There's also something incredibly consistent about who Thalita was throughout all of it. As a child, she watched a defeated kite fighter smile because he was still surrounded by friends. She grew up teaching other people the hobby she loved instead of keeping it to herself. And when her videos became popular, her first instinct had originally been to use them to bring more attention to her uncle's shop. When she discovered that fame wasn't making her happy, she used what she had gained from it to build a community of her own. Even when she walked into a bathroom and found someone being attacked, Thalita's instinct was to get involved, but not because she wanted to hurt anyone. She wanted to stop someone else from getting hurt. But she's not perfect. She's impulsive, competitive, mischievous. She can apparently look at a completely unidentified drone hovering over an empty field in the middle of the night and decide that knocking it out of the sky with a kite sounded like a fantastic idea. And we know that decision went very, very badly. But when things actually became dangerous, Thalita's first instinct was still about someone else. She didn't want to go looking for the drone. Renato did. She followed because she didn't want her brother going into the forest alone. And when Renato was injured, Thalita didn't run without him. When she found somewhere to hide, she brought him with her. And when an impossible beach appeared and seemed to offer an escape, she didn't leave him behind and take it for herself. She put his arm around her and tried to get both of them out. That's what makes the timing of Thalita's disappearance so cruel. The entity didn't find her when she was burned out, miserable, and wondering why the life she dreamed about wasn't making her happy. It found her afterward. Thalita had already figured it out. She had walked away from the life she thought she wanted, returned to the people and passion she actually cared about, built a successful business with her brother, and created a community that was entirely her own. On the day she disappeared, Thalita had actually stepped away from her own tournament just to cry because she was so freaking happy with what she had created. She had finally found where she belonged. And then, only hours later, it was gone. Thalita spent so much of her life bringing people together that in the end, she couldn't bring herself to leave someone behind. And that is exactly what led her into the fog.